Douglas-Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The public have rightly been outraged that a double rapist changed their gender after being charged by the police. This week, the Justice Secretary, Keith Brown, was asked if that rapist should now be considered a woman. This is what Keith Brown said. I think that is the case. We have to accept people identify, as in this case, as women. Does the First Minister agree with her Justice Secretary?
First Minister.
I think that rapist should be considered a rapist. That is what I think. That individual has been convicted of rapes and that therefore is the terminology. I'm not going to get into the individual circumstances of that particular individual's claims to be a woman, because I don't have enough information about that. But the individual has been convicted of serious sex offences, and that is the relevant consideration in terms of which prison they should be accommodated in. Can I say briefly, Presiding Officer, in addition to this, these issues have obviously had great public and media attention in recent days. But these issues are not new, nor have the arrangements within the prison service for dealing with transgender prisoners changed in any way. As the chair of the Scottish Prison Officers Association said this week, the Scottish Prison Service has been making risk-based decisions about the accommodation of trans prisoners for many years, and indeed they have been doing that effectively and safely. The risk assessment processes in the cases that have been reported in recent days were underway. It is not the case that any decision had been taken to allow either of those to serve their sentences in women's prisons. However, given the nature of the coverage and the potential for that to cause concern, I think the reality for that to cause concern amongst women prisoners and the general population, and indeed to cause distress in the trans community, the overwhelming majority of whom, like the overwhelming majority of the general population, never commit any offences, led us to clarify the matter and put it beyond doubt. And the position now, of course, pending the review that was already underway, is that no transgender prisoner with a history of violence, including sexual violence against women, will be housed in or transferred to a women's prison. I think that is what is important, and I think it is that clarity that matters to the public.
Douglas-Ross.
The First Minister's final words there were about clarity. I think that answer was anything but clear. Her Justice Secretary is very clear that he thinks a double rapist is a woman. He has enough information to come to that conclusion. The First Minister says she doesn't have enough information to come to that conclusion. But I do want to look at an area where we agree. Trans people are not the problem here. But here's where we disagree. When a man rapes two women, we don't think that he should be considered a woman just because he says so. We should call out criminals like this who are abusing the system. They are not trans people. They are dangerous and violent men. Adam Graham, who wants to be known as Isla Bryson, raped two women. He is an abusive man seeking to exploit loopholes in the government's current policy. Nicola Sturgeon's answer to me was she wants to call a rapist. But can she just give me a clear answer to my question, not what she wants to answer, but what I want to ask her? Is this double rapist a woman?
First Minister.
This individual claims to be a woman. What I said is that I don't have information about whether those claims have validity or not. But I don't think Douglas-Ross and I are disagreeing here, because what I think is relevant in this case is not whether the individual is a man or claims to be a woman or is trans. What is relevant is that the individual is a rapist. That is how the individual should be described, and it is that that should be the main consideration in deciding how the individual is dealt with. That is why, of course, the individual is in a male prison, not in the female prison. So these are the issues that matter. Douglas-Ross also talks about current policy. I accept he hasn't done this today, but I have read many things in recent days that have tried to conflate the situation in prisons with the legislation passed overwhelmingly by this Parliament before Christmas. Of course, the two are not connected, and they wouldn't be connected even if that legislation was in force, which it is not. The current policy, which is, in my understanding, broadly similar to the approaches taken in other jurisdictions, has been in place in the Scottish Prison Service since 2014. And as the chair of the Prison Officers Association said himself this week, the Prison Service has been taking risk-based decisions about transgender prisoners for many years, and they have been doing that safely and effectively. And that is what they should continue to do, albeit with the presumptions that were set out for clarity at the weekend.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister's right. I haven't mentioned the GRR bill at all. I'm speaking about the current government policy, the Scottish Government policy I have in front of me here, which states it is the view of the Scottish Government that trans women are women. It's the view of her Justice Secretary that a double rapist is a woman. I'm not sure what the First Minister's view on that is, because she says there's no disagreement between herself and I on this. There is a massive disagreement. I believe a double rapist, anyone who rapes a woman, is a man. They cannot be considered anything else. And Presiding Officer, this all matters for very good reasons. It matters because what happens when violent criminals like Adam Graham get out of prison? Under Nicola Sturgeon's current government policies, the ones I've just spoken about that she raised, he is considered a woman. That means sex offenders like him can keep forcing their way into women's spaces. Adam Graham was already able to access a beauty class after raping 2 women. 21-year-old Rachel Ferguson was in that class with him and told a newspaper this: "It really scares me to look back and realise that he was watching me with no clothes on after being charged with this. It makes me feel physically sick and violated." This is a fundamental question about women's safety. I refuse to trust the word of a rapist. Why does the First Minister?
First Minister.
I don't, and nothing I have said suggests that I do. But can I set out the reality here? And I think it is important that in rightly dealing with and me answering questions about this individual case, very serious individual case, we also remember, and it does bear repetition, that trans women are a very tiny proportion of our society, but the overwhelming number of them never commit any offences of any description, just like it is true for the overwhelming majority of the general population. And in dealing with individuals like this, who have to be dealt with very seriously, it is important that we don't inadvertently undermine the rights of the law-abiding majority of trans people in our country. And I think that is an important principle that we mustn't lose sight of. But rapists should be dealt with as rapists. I don't think there is any disagreement on that, and I don't think it does service to the victims of crime to suggest that we somehow do disagree on that issue. In terms of access to single-sex spaces, it is also the case that under current law, under the current Equality Act, which of course is legislation reserved to the UK Parliament, there are provisions to exclude trans women from single-sex spaces. And those exemptions can be applied whether or not a trans woman has a gender recognition certificate. So it's important that as we discuss these important issues, we do so firstly calmly, and I recognise we're having a calm exchange right now, but that we also do it without misrepresenting, even inadvertently, the position, because I don't think that does a service to the trans community more generally, but I don't think it does a service to the victims of male violence against women, and it doesn't do any service to the population at large. The final point I would remind Douglas Ross of, which is a point I have made before, and I don't stand here pretending to speak for them, But organisations like Rape Crisis Scotland, like Scottish Women's Aid, these are organisations that deal day and daily with women who have been the victims of male violence against them. Not only were they supportive of the legislation, but they deal with these issues and they deal with the situation around trans women each and every day. And I think all of us could do with listening more to them, because they are in many respects the experts in their field.
Douglas Ross.
We are having a calm debate, and I think that is right for this sensitive issue. But I am feeling frustrated, as I was last week, that I've asked the First Minister repeatedly for an answer that she refuses to give. Under law, a rapist has to be a man. Her Justice Secretary thinks this rapist is a woman, and I'd just like, in my final opportunity to the First Minister, to get a clear answer. Is Adam Graham, this double rapist, a man or a woman? Now, let's remember, in court, this man lied. He was telling people he didn't rape 2 women. But under Nicola Sturgeon's policy, he's believed when he claims to be a woman. So he can keep on demanding access to women's spaces. He can keep forcing victims to call him she. He can keep terrifying and traumatising women. I know there's murmurings from the SNP benches, so I would ask them and the First Minister to listen to the words of one of Adam Graham's victims. This survivor was raped by him and said this on Sunday: "I don't believe a word. I don't believe he's truly transgender. I feel as if he's made a mockery out of them using it. As far as I'm concerned, that was to make things easier for himself. I'm sure he's faking it." And this brave woman summed up the feeling of the majority of people in Scotland when she said this: "You've got genuine cases where people are desperate to get reassignment for the right reasons because they've been born into that body, not because they've raped 2 people and decided that that's an easy way out." First Minister, why are you giving rapists an easy way out?
First Minister.
I do think that does a disservice to victims of crime. Can I say a number of things, because they are all extremely important. The quote that Douglas Ross narrated there, my feeling is that is almost certainly the case, which is why the key factor in this case is not the individual's claim to be a woman. The key and in fact, only important factor in this case is that the individual has been convicted of rape. Yeah. The individual is a rapist, and that is the factor that should be the deciding one in decisions about how that prisoner is now treated. And indeed, that is what is happening in terms of where the prisoner is. Secondly, Douglas Ross has on more than one occasion today used the terminology of forcing access to women's-only spaces. These are important considerations, but that language ignores the exemptions under the current equality law, a law that, even if this Parliament wanted to, couldn't change. Exemptions that enable trans women to be excluded from single-sex spaces where the tests in that legislation are met, and to be excluded regardless of whether or not they have a gender recognition certificate. The other thing that Douglas Ross's questions ignore is the fact that for any sex offenders on release of prison, there are monitoring arrangements, the MAPA, the well-established MAPA arrangements, to ensure that any continuing risk posed by individuals, regardless of gender, are properly managed. So it is really important that we look seriously at all of these issues, but that in doing so, we bear in mind 2 things. Firstly, as I've said, that we do not further stigmatise trans people generally, and I think that is important. But secondly, that we don't cause undue concern amongst the public. If there are issues to be addressed, we address them, but we do that in a way that is not just calm but doesn't misrepresent the situation, because that is in nobody's interest. And I think if all of us come at these debates in that spirit, then we can work our way through all of these issues, respecting the rights of those whose rights deserve to be respected, but also protecting the public, and women in particular, from men who want to and do commit violent acts against them.